Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
I've begun using a really cool service from Aviva IQ, and it's made my life so much easier. My guests love receiving all the important details about their stay exactly when they need it. And I love all the 5-star reviews I'm getting on communication. Check them out at www.avivaiq.com. Welcome to another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. Today I am hosting this episode with my good friend Glenn Carter, who is the Director of Marketing of Hostfully. Glenn, how's it going?
It's going great, Jasper. How you doing? You still in Taipei?
I am still in Taipei. It's been a fun time, although it's been raining a lot. But that's okay. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's finally heating up here in Canada, so I'm in my my board shorts and a t-shirt, so ready for this podcast.
Ready for the summer. Awesome. So before we get started with the news, I have a small announcement because I decided to change it up a little bit. I'm getting a lot of questions from Airbnb hosts. Every day I get several emails, and I thought it'd be cool to split up the news podcast and to have two sections. So the first section is where we discuss the news, and then the second section will be where me and my co-host will be answering some of the questions that I've received during the week. I figured it'd be fun to do this because sometimes there's just not that much news to talk about, and so I thought it'd be interesting. So we're gonna change this and then see how it goes. I'll ask for some feedback from listeners as well to see if they like the new format, and then we'll take it from there. But first, we will start with the news. The questions will come at the end of the episode. Now, there's actually quite a lot of news this week. I'd say the most important news is that Airbnb is going to implement a new functionality that hosts can use to provide check-in instructions to their guests. So Airbnb came up with this idea because they started to allow people to use pictures in the messages. And what they noticed is that a lot of people send pictures of the door, the lockbox, or anything else that helps the guest understand how they can check in. And I think this is especially important when you're a remote host and there's nobody to actually welcome the guest at the property. I've personally experienced this a couple of times where it's just not completely clear which house is it exactly, which door should I use. Sometimes bigger buildings, they have multiple entrances. So I think it's a great move. It's interesting that there's lots of startups in the Airbnb space, and Hostfully is one of them, and they're in the business of providing guidebooks to guests. And I feel like Airbnb is also starting to implement some of the ideas that these startups have into their own platform, which kind of makes sense. I mean, they've already implemented smart pricing, but before they started doing that, there was already a bunch of pricing apps that were helping Airbnb hosts with that. So I think it's a good move. What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of people are wondering why Airbnb didn't do this sooner. The check-in process, as you know, can be sloppy and is totally dependent on the host and what else they have going on that day. So Airbnb is looking to make the check-in process a lot more seamless and accessible. And as you mentioned, something that we at Hostfully we've been doing this with our guidebooks for some time now. So I think the time is definitely right for Airbnb to do this. And hosts have to opt in for this new feature, and they can put together, like you said, a step-by-step guide on what guests need to know related to check-in. That can be which door to enter, where a lockbox is located, all that kind of stuff. The only challenge I see is this might not be well suited for hosts who either work with a vacation rental management company or those who advertise their listing on multiple platforms like, VRBO, HomeAway. Airbnb has an estimated, I think I read in Skift recently that they have 100 million professionally managed listings out of their total of about 3 million listings. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio. So guest experience consistency is hard when your check-in experience is limited to those who book through only Airbnb. Hosts can certainly try to mimic the user experience with other tools or a welcome email if they're using other booking platforms, but then you need to keep track of 2 or 3 check-in processes and deals. So it's a headache for hosts or property managers who have to manage the check-in process through Airbnb's app, and then there's a separate one through HomeAway's app or VRBO or an email or all that kind of stuff. But I think overall it's the right move, and it's going to certainly simplify the check-in process.
Right, and so Airbnb is rolling out this new check-in instruction tool across the globe this month. So stay on the lookout for this new functionality. They'll probably start in a few markets, and then they will slowly roll it out to other markets as they usually do. And you never really know where they're going to start. So it's a kind of a surprise. There's also some news from Canada, from Toronto, your homeland. Toronto is proposing some new rules for short-term rentals. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's good anytime that we can sort of clarify the legal gray area that the sharing economy more generally tends to operate in. I think that's a good thing. I think this is, happening amidst a backdrop of major cities across the globe working with Airbnb or legislators to try and implement common sense sharing economy regulations, particularly now with home sharing. Yeah, so Toronto, like you mentioned, the mayor has proposed new rules for short-term rentals. And this is not just for Airbnb, but short-term rentals in general. The city's Municipal Licensing and Standards Division released a bunch of new proposals today. They've been consulting with citizens for months on this, and the new rules aren't in place yet, so they have to be voted on by city council still. But essentially, it boils down to if you're not renting out the place you live in, then you won't be allowed to rent out. So it's got to be it's really what other municipalities are tackling, that you have to be renting out the house that's your primary residence. And it's going to amend zoning bylaws as well to create separate categories for these short-term rentals, which is probably an initial step to start taxing them, which isn't a big surprise. So yeah, I'm not too sure how it's going to go with people. With other municipalities, they're cracking down on these commercial operators, and they keep talking about these commercial operators. I don't know how widespread it actually is. Toronto seems to be towing the same lines, that they're trying to discourage, people turning current long-term rental units into Airbnb units or buying condos or properties solely for the purpose of renting them out on Airbnb, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But yeah, so that's where we're at in Toronto.
Awesome. We'll keep an eye on how that's going in the near future. Some good news from Japan. They passed a law that legalizes Airbnb and other sharing economy rentals. So that's some good news on the regulation front for Airbnb. It allows homeowners to let out their property to paying guests for up to 180 days per year, which is quite significant. It's quite high compared to some other places like Amsterdam, London, Paris, New York, those places where you can the rules are much stricter. Amsterdam is 60 days. I believe London is 90. Pretty good rules in place there. In Japan, it's one of Airbnb's top 10 markets worldwide, with about 5 million people using its service in the country over the past 12 months. It's good. A little headwind for Airbnb. Another article that came out on TechCrunch talks about Mr. B&B. Have you heard of Mr. B&B, Glenn?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Mr. B&B is the Airbnb for the gay and lesbian community. It's been around for a while. And right now, it actually has 100,000 hosts in 135 countries. So it's not that small anymore. But it's recently raised $8.5 million to build out their platform. And the article kind of discusses whether there's a place for little niche players like Mr. B&B, platforms that focus on a very specific crowd. The writer of the article argues that there may actually be a place for these platforms, as the market obviously is quite huge for short-term accommodations. I think that's true. The only challenge is that you don't want the market to get too fragmented, because then there's not going to be enough demand on each single platform, and also it's going to be more challenging for hosts to list on all these different platforms. I think in the end, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these niche platforms will survive, but at the same time, I don't think there can be too many.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Jasper. I think too much fragmentation it's going to get messy. I think with the Mr. B&B, it's called.
Yep, it's Mr. B&B.
The amount of money they raised is quite substantial, so that's definitely good to see other players entering entering the field, and I think they already have quite a bit of users on their platform, like you mentioned. So it's always good when you see that kind of competition coming into the market, because they're really, yes, HomeAway and VRBO, but seeing a couple other sort of niche players come in is always good to see. Just to go back quickly on the Japan thing, one thing I didn't know is that Japan is the most popular market in the Asia Pacific region, and this is before the legalization announcement today. And Airbnb claims that its hosts in that country have boosted the economy by $8 billion just last year in 2016. So that's huge, especially Japan's had some huge economic troubles for decades with stagnant growth and an aging population and significant urbanization. So home sharing is the perfect way for people to earn some much needed extra income and bring in more tourist dollars than it already is. So I think the decision makers in Japan, the Abe government are very forward thinking. I think they're also considering the Rugby Cup there in a couple of years, and they're also hosting the 2020 Olympics. So I think they're thinking ahead on that one.
Absolutely. Another news item that's been in the news quite a bit is Airbnb is helping a lot of refugees getting accommodation across the world. Now they have their Airbnb Open Homes project. Now this project aims to connect vacation rental owners with organizations that help refugees to find a temporary place to stay. And so, you can sign up for the Open Home project at airbnb.com/welcome/refugees. And what you can do is you can specify how often you would like to help refugees, how often you would like to provide housing to refugees. And you can also specify what type of cause you're most passionate about, so that Airbnb will then sort of match the cause, the type of refugee, with the cause that you are most passionate about. So I think that's a great initiative. It makes a lot of sense too, with Airbnb having about 3 million listings worldwide. They're in a really good position to provide help, because a lot of times people aren't renting out full time. Sometimes they're not allowed to rent out full time, and so I'm sure there's still a lot of empty space that's not necessarily being used. And so I think this is a great way for hosts to say, you know what, every month I'm gonna take like 5 days, and I'm gonna use those days to help a refugee.
Yeah, no, this is a fantastic initiative all around. There's nothing negative to say about this, and it solves so many logistic issues that are inherent in humanitarian effort. The fact that Airbnb already has this established platform, they have, like you mentioned, these 3 million listings, and surely there are very charitably focused hosts out there who would be happy to provide that kind of service. I think as of now, they have something like 6,000 listings on the Open Homes program, but I expect that to skyrocket after some good publicity. What surprised me about this, Jasper, is that the 6,000 current listings, over half of those are offered by individuals who are not existing Airbnb hosts. So these are just people who want to offer their placing as charitable effort, aren't actually Airbnb hosts earning an income on the platform.
Right. That's interesting indeed. Right now, there's a lot of refugees in Greece. There's a lot of people fleeing from the Middle East, especially Syria. And Airbnb is aiming to help 35,000 refugees in Greece to find a temporary place to stay. So this is, those are very significant numbers. It's a great initiative.
Hosts, does it feel like you're spending way too much time responding to questions from your Airbnb guests? Is the fear of a possible bad review keeping you up at night? I recently learned about a really helpful service called Aviva IQ. With Aviva IQ, my workload and worries have reduced dramatically. All I had to do was link my Airbnb listings to Aviva IQ, create my messages, and schedule delivery times. That's it. I can't believe how easy it was to set up. Now I can sit back and relax knowing that my guests receive all the important details on time, every time. Everybody sleeps better. Check them out at www.avivaiq.com.
All right, let's move into what are we going to do? Are we going to answer questions, or is there any other news that we should discuss?
No, I think we can. The only other thing I saw that was probably worth mentioning is there was data out recently about home sharing stimulating the Michigan economy, and it mentioned that more than 25 million was brought in through platforms like Airbnb in 2016 and about 200,000 visitors. So I think this is nothing new to people like you and I, but I think this is just another one in the pro column of home sharing that, boosting tourism and local economies is definitely, it's a hard argument to have now with all this data coming in now about stimulating state level economies. So that's something else I think that was worth noting.
Awesome. Thank you for that contribution. So now let's dive into the listeners' questions. So again, I get a lot of emails from listeners, and that's partly because when you sign up for my newsletter at getpaidforyourpad.com, I'll send you some information about how to host on Airbnb, some tips and tricks. And then I also sent an email that basically asked people what they need help with. And so a lot of people respond to that email. And in this section of the podcast, we're going to answer some of those questions. So the first question that we're going to discuss is a question submitted by Simao. And he has actually two questions. He is asking a question about how to overcome family resistance to embrace an Airbnb commitment. So his situation is that they have a country house, but he's not the sole owner. He's sharing that with his mom and his brother, and they are not necessarily very enthusiastic about the idea of hosting random people from the internet. And so the question is, how do you convince your family? How do you make them feel comfortable with this? So here's what I think. Here's my thoughts, and then I'll let you share your thoughts as well, Glenn. I think the first thing that you can do is to make them become familiar with Airbnb, right? Because when most people, they're scared of new things, they're scared of the unknown. And so one way to do that is to take them on a little trip and rent somebody else's Airbnb. So they get to experience what Airbnb is like, what Airbnb is about. And I think that will definitely make them feel more comfortable because, in fact, a lot of people start hosting on Airbnb because they use it during their travels first. I'm actually an example of that as well. And so I think that's a good idea. The other thing is, anything that you can do to make them feel more comfortable. Well, I'd say listen to some podcast episodes, listen to some stories from other people around the world who've also maybe been hesitant to give it a try and who ended up having great experiences. I would say, share a few podcast episodes with them so that they can hear, okay, there's, other people are doing this and it's generally a very positive experience. So those are the two things that come to my mind. What are your thoughts, Glenn?
I hadn't thought of the first one there, going on an Airbnb trip. That sounds like a fantastic piece of advice. And hey, you get a family trip out of it. So I definitely suggest that. Two quick things. I think being very clear about the accountability mechanisms that are built into Airbnb. So that's the insurance side of it, and that's the rating side of it. So maybe taking your family members on a virtual tour of Airbnb listings and what the ratings actually mean and how that provides a certain level of comfort to hosts that, if someone wants to rent out your place and they have 65-star ratings as a guest, you can be pretty darn sure that hosting a stranger, quote unquote, is, especially if you're of a particular generation, can be disconcerting. But I think if you're clear about exactly what goes on these platforms, this isn't just the Wild West where, some random person who you don't know their name can rent your place. Another thing I found, and this is on the financial side of things, showing people the income potential. There's some really good tools out there. AirDNA is one that I use for getting pricing data. You can actually input your city, and it'll give you analytics about the average income of various property types in that city. So you can even give an overview of, this is the kind of return we can expect on renting out our place on Airbnb. So that tends to push people over the edge if they see that, oh, wow, we can, there's all this extra income that we could have. So yeah, those would be my thoughts, Jasper.
That's awesome advice, Glenn. Thank you. Let's go into the second question. He's mentioning that he's planning to have a minimum of a 3-night stay. And the reason that he wants to implement that is because, he says it's a little bit too much hassle to do shorter stays. So stays of 1 or 2 nights. It's a lot of hassle with the check-in and the cleaning, etc. And I understand that. I used to have a 2-night minimum for the same reason when I started on Airbnb. Would this mean that the listing will get penalized in the search results? So Simao is worried that if he does put the 3-night minimum, that he's going to lose out on a lot of bookings because Airbnb is going to punish his listing and put it lower in the search results. I don't think that Airbnb directly punishes hosts who use a minimum stay. And so what I mean by that is, let's say somebody searches for a place on Airbnb for a stay of 3 days and longer. So in that case, Simao's listing would show up. I don't think that Airbnb will penalize his listing versus other listings that would also host people for 1 or 2 days. However, what I will say is in the search results, I think one important factor in determining the search results is, how many bookings do you get and how many reviews do you get? That's definitely an important factor. And so if you don't host people for 1 or 2 days, you're naturally going to have longer stays. And so that means like fewer bookings and fewer reviews. And you're obviously also directly missing out on some potential bookings, like people who want to stay 1 or 2 nights. You're obviously missing out on those. So it just means fewer bookings, fewer reviews, and that will have an influence on the position in your search results. So I think it's a personal choice. I recommend people who are starting out to definitely start with a 1 day minimum. So basically no minimum, because when you're just starting out, it's really important to get some momentum going. It's really important to get those first couple bookings and those first couple reviews in, because the difference between a listing with 0 reviews and a listing with 2 positive reviews is huge. People are very hesitant to book places without any reviews. So getting those first reviews in is essential to the long-term success of your Airbnb business. So my recommendations to Simao will be get over the hassle in the short term, bite the bullet, and accept the shorter stays as well. Once you've built a reputation on Airbnb and you're getting to almost full occupancy, then you can say, okay, you know what? Now I'm going to only do 2 days or longer or 3 days or longer, and see how that affects your bookings. And then you can choose whether the hassle is worth the extra money, the extra bookings that you'll get. Glenn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, just to echo what you said, I couldn't agree more. I think don't set up artificial barriers for yourself when you're getting started, because those initial reviews are key to your ongoing success. In this person's specific case, though, if they're trying to convince their family and the family are the ones helping clean, maybe that is having a factor in his decision to only do 3 nights. But remember too that you're likely collecting a cleaning fee on that 1 night stay. That 1 night stay is replacing a 0 night stay. So you know what? You got to go in and clean, but you're getting paid for it. So I don't think Airbnb penalizes the listings, but it's exactly like you said. If someone puts in 2 days, you're in your location, you're not going to show up. So I think I would always lean towards doing 1 day minimum, just because it's easier, it's more money for you, and it's going to increase your reviews and ratings and all that good stuff. So I think your advice, Jasper, was spot on.
Awesome. So if people have questions and you want us to discuss your question, then feel free to send an email to jasper@getpaidforyourpad.com, or you can also just sign up for my newsletter at getpaidforyourpad.com, and then you will automatically get those emails and you can respond to them. I hope this answers your question, Simao, and that brings us to the end of the episode. So Glenn, thank you very much for your input. It's always a pleasure to be talking to you.
Yes, thank you, Jasper, and enjoy the rest of your time in Taipei.
I certainly will, and good luck with everything that's happening at Hostfully. And of course, listeners, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.